Good evening, everyone. I hope you all had a wonderful weekend. Let's jump right into Collectively Rewilding. All right, here we are. And as usual, there's been new activity, the advertisements for class tonight. And class is going to be down towards the bottom in Yarn Yard for Tall Tales. All right. I have decided that for the moment, we're going to stop with the leaves, roots, and fruits because we've kind of exhausted as much as I think we need to cover about the microgreens and the sprouts. And it's not quite time for most of us to be dealing with the leaves portion. So we'll wait another month or so, and then we'll go into the leaves portion of leaves, roots, and fruits, right? Of course, sprouts and microgreens have leaves, but then we're talking more along the lines of like arugula or cabbage or your basic salad greens, spring mix, perhaps the romaines, things of that nature, right? And so instead, today we're going to tear into the Herbal Almanac from Llewellyn's, which is a little bit different than Farmer's Almanac in composition, but it has a lot of fun material in it. And first, I'd like to read out of this cute little wildflower guide and seed catalog that I got. They just got my name somewhere, knew I was interested in plants, and sent me a catalog from Wild Seed Farms. And they have this very unusual, I believe it's a pansy. Let me just look here, a purple tansy. And it's on page 36. So I will look up this particular brand of pansy and put it in, or tansy, excuse me, put it in our chat here, or our feed, called Lacy Basilia, and it is a purple tansy. It's these gorgeous bluish purple flowers. And so let's see if we can't find it from this Wild Seed Farm. Here we are. Okay. Really pretty, almost like a bee balm sort of a flower there. And I imagine that the bees absolutely love them. Post that. All right. Now, what I want to read out of here is their advice in regards to wildflowers. Let's see. I like the way they talk about taking care of wildflowers in your gardening arrangements, right? It starts with the seed. Starting your wildflowers from seed. Wildflowers are becoming an increasingly popular landscape alternative by adding color and natural beauty to any area. Unlike the typical European-style formal gardens of straight lines, square corners, and manicured edges, wildflower gardens have the appeal of low maintenance by requiring little water and reduced mowing frequency once established. There is a common misconception today that wildflowers are easily grown from seed. Indeed, some species require little more effort than casting the seed on the soil and waiting for growth. Most wildflowers, however, require specific soil and temperature conditions, a certain degree of ongoing personal attention, and most of all, patience. We have tried in this catalog to assist you in your wildflower selection by labeling each species with an average planting success rate on a scale of 10% to 100%. Wildflower species with a lower percentage ratio may require more of your time and attention, but will be worth your effort. Additional information about the temperament of each species is included within the description. Unlike ornamental flower or vegetable seeds, most of the wildflower seeds in our catalog have not been genetically altered to achieve specific traits, such as rapid germination, height, color, or adaptation to specific soil types or climates. Each species has been tested for purity and germination by an independent laboratory and meets our high standard of quality before we make the seed available to you for planting. As wildflower enthusiasts, we want to produce in 2 to 3 years a display of color to match that which has taken Mother Nature hundreds of years to achieve. Nature plays an important role in the success or failure of all wildflower planting. Adverse weather conditions, such as drought, hail, or excessive rainfall, obviously beyond human control, may seriously affect the success of your wildflowers. Soil or drainage problems in your planting area may also hamper germination of your seeds. Interpretation of the best possible planting area is the customer's responsibility. And I had definitely done some preparation over here in the side yard where I tried to get some wildflowers to come up. But learning how much clay is here, I absolutely understand why we failed almost completely. We had calendula up here, and I think maybe a pot marigold, like 1 to 3 plants appear in that side area. And that's because all I did was put mulch over it, which is definitely a beginning point, right? But it wasn't enough for the wildflower seeds to take root. We at Wild Seed Farms are anxious for your success with wildflower gardening. Additional help and technical advice is available simply by calling us. We cannot, however, assume liability for the results obtained based on advice given, nor can we be responsible for the substandard performance of our product due to conditions beyond our control. And so they're like, if they screwed up, they'll take part and they'll have something to do to fix it. But if we go and we plant it in heavy clay soil in the shade, too much water, not enough water, it's just like any other type of plant. We don't just get to throw it out there and say, okay, I'm done, right? Now, for site considerations for placement and a good start. Prior to planting your wildflowers, select a site that will be appropriate for the nature of your project. Improper site selection or planning usually produces unsatisfactory results. Here are some important factors to consider. 1, does this chosen site support plants now? If you have an area that is naturally void of any plants, including unwanted weeds, the area is unlikely to support wildflowers. 2, if rainfall is inadequate during germination and seedling establishment, can you supply water if necessary? 3, does the area receive a minimum of 8 hours of direct sunlight per day? Remember, when we go back to that ideology within leaves, roots, and fruits, it talks about each level needing more sunlight, and the flowering, fruiting plants needed the most at anywhere from 6 to 12 hours of sunlight a day, right? 4, have you determined the existing soil type and drainage within the area? Poorly drained or heavily compacted soil, which clay obviously is, will produce unsatisfactory results. Assessment of these important factors will be necessary to ensure your success. Then, how do I plant my wildflowers? I really like their process, and I think that it's something to consider anytime you're doing large plantings, right? If you're in a raised bed and you're going by the circle method or the square foot method, you're going to want to be very specific with your placement of seeds. When you're growing an area filled with wildflowers, you want it to be more natural. You're just going to sort of broadcast the seed out, try not to let it clump too much, try to disperse it relatively evenly, okay? So 2 totally different styles of planting. And when you have that large area, perhaps you're even putting cover crops over your garden for your actual raised bed or in-ground gardening area, then you would perhaps go with a method somewhat like this to achieve better results than simply broadcasting the seed and, of course, yes, getting it adequate water and things. But this is a little bit beyond that. How do I plant my wildflowers? And let me actually stop my share so that I can show you all the pictures at the bottom as I describe them. For those who are watching, you'll see the pictures. For those who aren't, you'll hear the description. And so, how do I plant my wildflowers? In order to achieve a successful stand of wildflowers, it is very important that the soil is prepared correctly and the seed is rolled or pressed into the soil after sowing. Burying the seed too deeply or casually broadcasting the seed over an unprepared area will only produce disappointing results. 1. Select a site that drains well. Oftentimes, we tend to plant in areas that are low-lying or poorly drained, thinking that the wildflowers will flourish under these moist conditions. Moist locations are usually very weedy because as water drains through the area, thousands of weed seeds are deposited onto the site that were collected upstream. Remember, most wildflowers thrive in well-drained soils. 2. Use an herbicide to eliminate any vegetation which may compete with your wildflowers. Optional, right? So that's not something that I would pursue ever. 3. Mow the existing or dead vegetation as short as possible. Collect the clippings and remove the material from the site, right? Especially if you're talking about a lot of weed seeds, that's trying to get that out of there to get as much of it eliminated as possible. 4. To prepare the seedbed, rake or lightly till the surface of the soil to a maximum depth of 1 inch, just to give enough loosening to the soil for the seeds to take purchase, right? Shallow soil preparation will limit the disturbance of dormant weed seed, and it doesn't destroy your soil structure, and. Number 5, it is helpful to thoroughly mix a carrier such as masonry sand, perlite, potting soil, etc. to the seed to increase volume and aid in even distribution over your site. We recommend a minimum of 4 parts inert material to 1 part seed. And so for this heavy clay area, no sand, right? And instead of perlite, I would go with Utilite, a local source. And that would be something that you guys would also want to consider as well, giving what your soils are, what your available material is, if you have enough compost perhaps, replacing potting soil, perlite, or sand. And then in those areas where a little bit of sand is beneficial, that's a great thing to do as well. Number 6, broadcast 1/2 of your seed as uniformly as possible over the prepared area. So the remaining seed in a direction perpendicular to the initial sowing. Number 7, press the seed into the soil by walking or rolling over the newly planted area. Do not cover the seed any deeper than 1/16 of an inch. Some of the seeds will remain visible. Note, do not plant wildflowers in clover or grasses that grow during winter. Example, annual ryegrass or fescues, as this vegetation will be too aggressive to allow the wildflowers to become established. And so now, for the little areas underneath, the first image is showing the preparation of the seedbed, raking or tilling the surface of the soil to a maximum of a depth of 1 inch. And then next, you have smooth the area by raking. Remove any leaf litter or debris prior to seeding. So they're just raking it there. And third, combine the seed with a carrier such as sand. Broadcast the seed in 2 directions. And that is the distribution process right there. And actually adding that inert material, I'd not heard of that recommendation before, probably because I just get out there and do things without always reading things thoroughly. And I'd never done that. It's going to make my seed distribution so much easier and cost effective. And then finally, you have this last picture here, and it's press the seed into the soil by walking or rolling. Do not cover the seed deeper than 1/16 of an inch. Some of the seeds will be visible. And I just really liked that. So if you had seeds that needed to go a little bit deeper, perhaps a second pass over, or taking a shaker of some sort and distributing a little bit of soil over it if it was a large area, right? And so what did you guys think about that? Did that give you a broader understanding of wildflowers and utilizing them on your properties?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. And that's Miss Vanessa. She's always busy in the background. Benny or Tammy, any thoughts? everybody's quiet tonight. I really thought that it was a much more in-depth preparatory guide and the actual planting guide. I really liked that idea of rolling over a large area. When you read that and you're thinking, I'm planting this over, a huge yard. The yard we were on previously was a quarter of an acre, and this is just under a quarter of an acre. So even when you're putting it in on 1/4 of that amount or 1/3 of that amount, you're talking a large area to try to worry about seed depth. And also, I always wonder, Mother Nature doesn't bury all of these seeds, right? And Tammy says she can't talk. Her dogs are going crazy. And so, yes, I liked that idea. And gently rolling it, that's not going to compact your soil. It's when you get in the big, heavy equipment and you do the rolling that you really see the compacting. And especially if you're not going over it a lot or trying to put a lot of pressure, you're just really lightly rolling that machine, that hand machine over your soil, right? All right, so now we will jump into Llewellyn's 2026 Herbal Almanac. And this is an article by, it said it at the front, but it's not saying it here. Let me go and look at it in the contents menu again for you guys. Special feature, Learning to Garden in an Ever Hotter World by J.D. Walker. That is the 2026. I'm sure I got that right. It looks so different in the contents menu. Learning new books, right? Oh, that's because I'm on the wrong page. I apologize, everyone. So let's go back to the proper one. That one also looks wonderful. Maybe I was going to read both of them to you. I think that is what I actually decided to do, because this is 2026 Themed Garden Plans, a cocktail garden. And we've talked about this a little bit previously from, oh goodness, and I can't remember. It might have been Kellogg Gardens. I do love their material online. And we've talked about things like a salsa garden. And that is, oh goodness, darn. It's not going to tell me. I'm pretty sure that that's Kellogg Garden. I will try to figure that part out. But this is a 2026 themed garden plan from the Herbal Almanac for a cocktail garden, which is one of them that we talked about, but they have a completely different viewpoint. A cocktail garden is an excellent choice whether you want to host parties or enjoy relaxing evenings in the backyard. Cocktails and mocktails are so much better with ingredients picked just moments before. As you'll want to use these ingredients fresh, I recommend laying this garden out around a patio, porch, or outdoor seating area for easy access. And the way they have that displayed, you can see how that would make it really nice because it would add a lot of useful area to your garden that you may not normally have considered. Alternatively, you could stretch it along a pathway. Gardeners in the northern hemisphere should place taller backdrop plants like raspberries or peach trees on the northern side so that they don't shade the seating area and other parts of the garden. Fill in the other edges with an exciting mix of sun-loving and flavorful herbs, fruits, vegetables, and edible flowers, including cherry tomatoes, mint, basil, marigolds, and strawberries. And so they have a peach tree right up here at the top in the north with 2 raspberry bushes to the sides. And then going underneath that, down from the left hand, if you're facing it, they have basil, a cherry tomato, marigolds. That looks like some sort of mint, perhaps, but they just have a generic kind of picture. I think they're just repeating it, it looks like. So it's going basil, cherry tomato, marigold, basil, cherry tomato, marigold, basil, cherry tomato, marigold. Then on the southern, in the northern hemisphere, right? On the southern edge, you have borage and strawberry, just borage and strawberry, borage and strawberry. Now on the right-hand side, they show mint as being here. I would never recommend leaving mint without serious safeguards to keep it from spreading. This is a bad idea. And I've also heard that wild strawberries, I'm going to use it for that. If you don't mind it covering the area, that's great. But if you don't want it to take over, you wouldn't want to use wild strawberries, at least, for sure. So the mint, I would never recommend. Then sage, bachelor's button. That's interesting. I know that you can use bachelor's button as a dye, but I did not think that they were in any way edible. Let's go and check that out. Let me just put this down. I know I had a bookmark right around here somewhere, but this will work. Okay. Oh, the bachelor's buttons, also known as cornflowers, are edible flowers with mild, slightly spicy, sweet taste, and their colorful petals, blue, pink, purple, white, are great for garnishing salads, desserts, cheeses, and drinks, or even adding to teas. You can use the petals for color in baking or add the whole flower to dishes for a decorative touch. I had no idea. Bachelor's buttons were a huge part of my childhood. Very interesting to learn. All right. So continuing on, they also have rosemary, and they don't keep it as uniform on this side. It's mint, sage, bachelor's button, rosemary, then lavender, bachelor's buttons again, and nasturtium. So it's a little bit varied there. And again, I would never use mint, and be careful about wild strawberries. Now we're going to a drought tolerant garden. Gardening is tough, and it's even more challenging when dealing with drought conditions. This garden is set up for a front yard with a path left open to reach your porch or door, but you could easily adjust the layout to work in a backyard or other space. Oh, I love this. I want to put something around our front walkway. We already have some ditch lilies, and they're pretty and they can certainly stay. But on the other side, I would love to get some herbs and things. So this is exactly the kind of thing I was thinking about. And I'd like to make a small berm, very, very small. And just to catch the runoff, no swale, no dip, just that little mound, and fill that with herbs all around the edge of the yard. How pretty and useful would that be? So that's a little bit like what this is. Okay, on one side, the garden is centered around common ninebark, an excellent native shrub with year-round interest. I've never heard of ninebark. Have any of you heard of ninebark?
I haven't.
No, it's completely new to me. All right, an excellent native shrub with year-round interest. The rest of the space is filled with a simple repeating layout of stunning low-maintenance plants like coreopsis, echinacea, yarrow, and a little blue stem. To add more color to your layout, look at different cultivars. For example, white yarrow is quite common, but yarrow also comes in reds, pinks, yellows, and creams. You can even find mixed packs of seeds. Coreopsis and echinacea or coneflower also come in various colors. And so they have Rudbeckia, coreopsis, little blue stem, and then a repeating pattern on one side. That would be to the left side on this example. And they have on the right side a larger area with yarrow sandwiching around echinacea, and then some anise hyssop that starts to sandwich around some common ninebark, but that's relatively on its own as a solid stand. And then again, you have the echinacea, this time surrounding the yarrow to balance that out, ending with the little blue stem. So very pretty. I would definitely want a little bit more variety. The pattern repeating, it's something to think about, and I may do a little bit of that. However, I'm into variety. Also, I don't like to go anywhere towards monoculture. This is obviously not monoculture, but I just find that there are several other types of plants that could be very beneficial in these types of arrangements, right? And they have a good arrangement for the cocktail garden. The drought tolerant garden, I think that we could get a little bit more variety in. Now, a cottage garden, and it is much more broadly general space, right? It's random-ish, but quite well balanced in this example. Cottage gardens bring a dreamy, whimsical element to your landscape. Originally inspired by small British gardens where laborers crammed flowers, vegetables, and herbs into their small lots, cottage gardens are a great way to make use of a small space. They allow you to bend the rules and blend your favorite plants to create a more natural look. One of the best tips for cottage gardeners is to think about a black and white photograph of your garden. Would it still have enough variation in height, texture, and form to be attractive? In this design, I chose a broad mix of plants, including shrubs, vines, tall flowers like larkspur, and low creeping flowers like phlox. Repeating a few clumps of each helps the garden feel unified while maintaining its wild look. I also incorporated as many plants as possible that blur the line between edible and ornamental. Chives, nasturtiums, and strawberries are obvious choices that are great for salads. Depending on the variety, you can also enjoy edible salvia as an herb or garnish an edible rose hips and petals. Feel free to play with your favorite varieties for this design. And so in the back, again, tending towards the north, in the middle, you have a dwarf hydrangea surrounded by a climbing rose on each side. And then going down the left, you are going to be having a mixture of salvia, strawberry, snapdragon, and phlox. It looks like on the right side, you have some of the same as well as, oh, no, they just are identifying them. They're broadcast throughout the entire garden, nasturtium, chives, and larkspur. So again, a lot of fun and something that could be much more personalized for anyone that would enjoy having a little bit more variety, maybe specific natives to an area that you're in, those kinds of choices. Now, this is interesting. This is the poison garden. And so this is going to be, I'm guessing, most likely medical herbs. And I've always been aware of the fact that there are some plants that I'd like to grow, not even necessarily as a medical herb, such as foxglove. That is something you do not want to play with as an herbalist. It is very dangerous, and you definitely want to go to a practitioner. And certainly, if you did want to pursue it as an herb, you'd want to go to a certified herbalist and not deal with it on your own. But it's a very dangerous flower, actually, to pets and children. And so you have to be very aware when you put some of these things into your spaces, depending on who you have around your area, whose neighboring area, right? The kids that may walk by. We're right next to a school over here, so children are always in this area. I wouldn't want to put any foxglove or comparable dangerous plants along the front walkway there. I would certainly want to keep them at least far back in the front area or even in the backyard, right? And so a poison garden. It's not all sunshine and roses. This garden has a darker side. The plants chosen for this garden may be beautiful, but they can also be deadly. If you have curious young children, pets, or livestock, this may not be a suitable garden for you. While all these plants are safe to touch, they can cause severe illness or even death if ingested. The garden is designed as a keyhole around a yew tree. And yes, yews are poisonous. The ancient Celts used the yew's leaves for ritualistic suicide and to create poison arrows. The tree is surrounded by equally ominous plants like hellebore, which may have played a role in ending the life of Alexander the Great. And it was also a common component of witches' potions that they would rub on themselves for astral projection. Monkshood, also known as aconite or wolfsbane, it's such a pretty silvery green plant. Oh my gosh, I love it, if I remember it correctly. And it has, let's just take a quick peek and we'll post it in there as well. Monkshood. Purple flowers, if I remember correctly. And they are just so beautiful and yet very, very dangerous, right? So we'll post that in a minute. And then continuing on, monkshood, which earned one of its names as wolf poison in ancient Greece, and belladonna, the beautiful lady whose compounds were used to create psychedelic flying ointments, poisons for armies facing the Romans, and possibly deadly last meals for emperors Claudius and Augustus. Plants are no joke, right? Foxglove and bouncing bet are two of the tamer plants. And foxglove can be deadly. So tamer is in relativity only. Foxglove and bouncing bet are two of the tamer plants in this garden. While they're unsafe to ingest, they have some handy uses. Bouncing bet makes an excellent cleaner, as it's also called soapwort, one of the first things that we used as a soap-type substance. Foxglove contains digitalis and was one of the first medicines discovered for treating heart failure, though it may also have killed Edward IV. That's why it's not to be played around with. I believe they synthesize it, but it is common in at least one very regularly prescribed heart medicine, but it's very specifically measured in its dosing and things of that nature. It's nothing to play around with. The last plant, castor bean, may be the most widely used poison on this list. Ricin, a compound derived from castor beans, has been used throughout history as a biological weapon and is one of the most toxic compounds known. In modern times, it has been the weapon of choice in several murder attempts against political officials. And here is that keyhole garden example there. Planning your 2026 garden. Prepare your soil by loosening and fertilizing. Use the grid on the next page, right? We've talked about grids over and over again for gardening purposes. Enlarging on a photocopier if needed to sketch your growing space and identify sunny and shady areas. Plot shade and sun. For new beds, watch your yard or growing space for a day, checking at regular intervals, such as once an hour, and note the areas that receive sun and shade. These will shift over the course of your growing season. Plant accordingly. Diagram your space. Consider each plant's spacing needs before planting. Vining plants such as cucumbers will sprawl out and require trellising or a greater growing area than root crops like carrots or radishes. Be sure to avoid pairing plants that naturally compete or harm each other. And they have a companion planting guide in here on page 252. Also consider if your annual plants need to be rotated. Now remember, with the gardenary method, when you rotate from your cool season to your warm season to your hot season, back to your warm season to your cool season, or whatever pattern they're in that fits your region, you are alternating the crop types almost automatically by doing that, right? It's a very nice built-in bonus to that particular pattern of gardening or style of gardening. Some herbs will reseed. Some can be planted in the same place year after year, and some may need to be moved after depleting the soil of certain nutrients during the previous growing season. Determine your last spring frost date. Using data from previous years, estimate the last spring frost date for your area and note what you'll need to plant before or after this date. Refer to seed packets, plant tags, and experts at your local garden center or university extension for the ideal planting time for each plant. Keep track of frost dates here, and then it shows that you can go back to 23 and up to 2026. That may be it. And then you have a nice little chart to begin keeping track of what it is that you're doing, right? All right, and so let's see if we have time for the other article that I started talking about. And that is in here as well. Oh goodness, and now I'm having trouble finding it. So let me try one more time here. Maybe it was the art and practice of wild tending, but I could have sworn there was one about gardening in extreme temperatures. Well, I'll have to find that one another time. But we have the Art and Practice of Wild Tending by Mandana Bushi on page 35. Another great article for our community. All right, and how here they have her name. How interesting. My family, like many Iranians, left Iran after the revolution of 1979, first traveling to Greece, then England, and finally settling in the Hudson Valley of New York. Upon arrival in New York, my mother was distraught that so many of Iran's celebrated ingredients could not be found at U.S. markets and grocery stores. That would be hard, right? You get used to what you get used to, and you want to be able to eat that. Commonly eaten dishes were now impossible to make, as so many herbs, fruits, and vegetables are endemic to Iran. In Iran, wildcrafting is a very common pastime and tradition. Even in the busy capital of Tehran, thousands will head out of the city in the summer to picnic and enjoy the start of the black mulberry harvest. My mother spent her childhood frolicking in her mother's gardens, fishing in the stream with her father, and foraging from the wild with her family. As my mother tackled settling into her newly foreign life, still living within the heartbreak of diaspora, she slowly started to find and recover parts of herself and her cultural story. On walks in her newfound landscape, she began to recognize familiar plants growing in New York. Though they were slightly different from the species growing back home, she found comfort in the family resemblance. Soon, plants like barberry, sumac, mulberry, mimosa, and sour cherry were finding their way back into the kitchen of our souls. My mother had an irresistible urge to harvest roots that went unpicked and would often charm our neighbors into letting us harvest fruit and vegetables from their gardens that would otherwise go to waste. I can't recall the first time I went foraging with my mother, but I do remember the first time I realized that wildcrafting wasn't something the average American did at that time. I was about 7 years old when my mother and I were collecting sour cherries from a neighbor's tree when a passerby stopped to ask what we were doing. My mother cheerfully explained we were harvesting the fruit. Shocked, he shook his head, remarking we could be poisoned as we walked away. At the time, I remember feeling a deep sense of embarrassment and shame, knowing even as a young girl that our way of life was very different from a lot of our neighbors. Sometime after this encounter, I stopped going on foraging walks with my mother and began to hide from my rituals and cultural customs. Luckily, over time, a rose in bloom can remind us of the spectacular miracle that is the living world around us. It didn't take long for me to be reignited by the macrocosm of plants. Reconsidering wildcrafting. By 18, I was backpacking around the US and the world, self-studying plants and herbalism, and learning to subsist more than ever on a wild food diet. I felt pride to be practicing my traditions as my relatives did before me, while also carrying a new sense of agency in having access to self-reliant strategies and food economies. While I finally settled back in the Hudson Valley in my late 20s, it seemed as if Western culture was waking from a long slumber. People were questioning, challenging, and examining our relationships to land, food, and health. Soon, restaurants began introducing wild foods onto menus, successfully igniting a desire and excitement around trying new flavors and ingredients. That growing excitement also manifested in the health and medicine industries, and eventually into the beauty economy. Medicines like bitters, chaga, and elderberry were becoming common in mainstream culture. Remember, we talked about bitters one time, and I'm sorry, I need to take a drink, so it's actually tearing up my eyes. But my grandmother took bitters, right? And it was just this powder that she called bitters. I think she took it for a headache, but perhaps she had one for stomach ache as well. I can't quite remember. Okay. It was during this time that I began to see changes in the woods and lands I'd known and loved since childhood. The first sign of disrespect and misharvest I discovered was with the ramps, a type of wild onion, right? Allium trichocum, that grew in one of my most beloved hollows. In this undisturbed forest, many native plants grew in abundance. Spring beauties, toothwort, and red trillium carpeted the spring forest floor, but none more than the ramps. Upon a steep ridge lay acres of tightly packed ramps. In my years walking the land, I learned from the elders who still foraged in these forests that they waited until the late spring to harvest the ramps when the bulbs were their tastiest and juiciest. Each late spring, I'd climb the ridge in search of clumps of tightly packed ramps. Loosening the soil, I'd harvest the middle-sized bulb from clusters of 3, making sure to leave the fleshy white root behind. Before covering the remaining bulbs back in the dirt, I'd give each bulb a little more room to grow before packing the dirt in around them. Though it was time-consuming, I gave thanks to each plant I disturbed and harvested, and by the end of the day, I'd leave with a beautiful bundle of ramps and a deep sense of gratitude. I was troubled one spring when, along the trail to the ridge, I stumbled upon a ramp unearthed with its roots still intact on the trail floor. As I looked ahead, I noticed a trail of pulled-up ramps leading to the ridge. Slowly, I began to realize that someone must have harvested the ramps and carelessly didn't bother to pick up the fallen ramps on their way out of the forest. Once I'd made my way to the ridge, I was shocked to find the state the land and plants were left in. Whoever had harvested the ramps hadn't even bothered to climb the ridge, taking the closest and first ramps that grew, leaving not a single one behind. I felt grief-sick and sat on the ridge a while, feeling through so many emotions. I didn't harvest any ramps that day. When I got back home, I was overwhelmed with a sense of loss. A practice that I loved, that I felt culturally attached to, and that was connected to my sustenance, suddenly felt changed. Though I practiced ethical wildcrafting, I knew I couldn't continue harvesting ramps from that hollow anymore. At that time, I'd often take time when walking in the woods to pick up trash or pull up garlic mustard plants that were finding their way into native plant habitats. When I'd hear word of land being deforested, a group of friends and I would rescue whatever plants we could before the dirt was covered with blacktop. These acts felt important to me as a way to reciprocate the gifts I received from the plants. But that day with the ramps brought important truths and lessons to light. The art and practice of wild tending. Though I felt connected to nature and in good relationship with it, I too assumed that I had an unspoken permission to harvest. I realized that day it didn't matter if I thought I was harvesting ethically and with integrity. Questions that kept coming up for me included: was my relationship to plants consensual and generous? Was I responsibly engaging in my role in our relationship? Were there other ways I can connect with wild plants? The more I listened and questioned, the more I learned that there were a multitude of ways to engage with plants in the wild. I call this practice and relationship in my own life wild tending. I've recentered practices that feel regenerative and give me more opportunities to build language and friendship with plants, like crafting flower, plant, and environmental essences, or simply sitting with plants and spending time. I tend plants in the wild, supporting their many different forms of plant reproduction and their overall health. In return, I received the gift of joy, felt throwing wish-filled milkweed seeds to the wind to disperse. I have become a better scavenger, taking what the wind and rain leave behind. I am grateful for the resilient, abundant, adaptive plants that some call invasive. I feed the soil nourishing teas, whispering prayers to all their mysterious moving parts. I am astounded by all the ways the land gives, and I let them rest, not expecting the loam to always be productive or of use. I am fed in a new way. The harvest now takes many forms and is full of lessons. As herbalists, land stewards, and plant admirers, more than ever we are being asked to question our relationship to the land and natural resources, as the land is asking us to reciprocate our care and dedication. As we reflect wild tending into our practices, herb schools, businesses, and apothecaries, we are discovering the tiny tears tiny tares that were hiding there all along. We are being called to do more, to activate, to speak up, and advocate for our more than human relatives. Injustice, greed, and disrespect for the land. No, okay. Excuse me. Where were we? Injustice, greed, and disrespect for the land has brought us onto the shores of our new shared reality. We are facing an angry earth and the long grief that comes with the loss of endangered and at-risk plant species. It is time for us to remember the bird call, the fruit that brings us to tickle the trees, the feel of moving water on our hands. We have the opportunity to unconditionally bring the reishi mushroom and hemlock tree a feast of food for their saprobic relationship, the river's water a shiny stone for their life-giving qualities, and the mountains a song to echo for their strength and stability. May we find ways to tend this wild seed in which we live into a bouquet of beautiful creation. Guidelines for ethical wild tending. Respect the land. Harvest only what you need and will use. Do not waste what you have harvested. As a general rule of thumb, don't harvest more than a third of what is there and let lie some of the strongest looking plants to keep the strands thriving. Be mindful of your energetic state while harvesting. We've proven that we affect water with our energy, that we affect plants with our energy. So think good thoughts, right? Practice harvesting with humility and gratitude. Learn and offer care. Learn how plants reproduce and how to support the process. Spread their spores and seeds, replant root divisions, and so on. Learn the endangered, rare, and at-risk plants of your area. Don't harvest these plants, and educate and advocate on the harm of harvesting these plants. Consider growing these plants in a sanctuary garden. Learn the invasive plants of your area. These plants are abundant and useful and can be harvested in larger quantities. You can literally pick every part of it that you can find, right, when it's an invasive plant. Feed the soil and plants nourishing teas to support their health and well-being. Tend without exception. Leave the land more beautiful than when you came. Pack out what you pack in and more. If the area you are harvesting from is filled with trash, gather some of the trash as well. Be a steward and advocate for the land and more than human relatives. Educate folks about endangered and at-risk species. Don't be afraid to speak up at a potluck or farmer's market while wildcrafted at-risk plants or mushrooms like ramps or chaga are being sold or utilized. If you know of a green area that is going to be developed, gather a team of people together to harvest and transplant as many of the plants as possible to an area that is protected or considered a plant sanctuary. Be astounded by all the ways the land gives and let it rest, not expecting it to always be productive or of use. All right, so what did you guys think about that article? Any thoughts?
I think it was very interesting.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about when you're gathering something in the wild? Have any of you gathered anything in the wild before? Go
I,
ahead, Miss Vanessa.
I've never gathered anything. My sister and her boyfriend, they go mushroom hunting in
And do
Washington.
they ever talk about the ethical aspects of wild harvesting?
No, I don't really talk to him about it. They've showed me pictures of like the tables and stuff that they have. I don't know what he does. I think he cans them or something. I'm not sure what he does with them.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of people that forage for mushrooms are aware of needing to be respectful of the balance with their harvesting, right? Not always, but a lot of them. Anyone else? Any thoughts? Check and see with Benny here. Your yard is about an acre, Benny? Goodness. Yeah, you can't care about every little seed placement, right? And you can't wait to transform your yard. Do you have plans on what you would like to do? We'll give him a moment to answer there. He says he's still new to this gardening world. I was in a special class with Nicole Burke because I purchased the Cool Season Planner, right? I talked to you guys a little bit about that. I think it's right here. The Cool Season Gardenary Planner. And so I got to go to a special class. And one of the things that she said is she's always still learning. And I absolutely agree, right? Nine bark. I'd not heard of nine bark. Brand new plant to me. Always still working or learning. And then he says he's still working on it. So are you thinking like something like wildflowers, like grass? Do you want to do raised beds, in-ground gardening? Any specific thoughts? Or are you still just kind of hanging out, dreaming, still exploring? My thoughts on such a big property, right? Even on my property that's less than a quarter the size of what you're dealing with, I've picked one area at a time to deal with, right? Now they're all in stages at this moment, but I never focused on the whole thing at once. So you might look at it a little bit more like that. Maybe think about the stuff in your front yard area or your backyard area or a side yard that's your favorite, whatever one area as a starting point, right? When you're not experienced with gardening or planting a garden, looking at an acre is really not only overwhelming, but to some degree unproductive. Because if you really try to plan out that whole acre when you haven't gotten much experience in what you're dealing with, you're probably going to end up putting things you're going to regret placing, right? Like the shrubs or trees or things of that nature. So if you start out with one section of what you're dealing with and just think about what you'd like to have there, does that seem like that might be a more approachable way to look at the area that you have access and some influence over? Not really. So what do you feel is stopping you, or do you feel like you're really moving along and you have a good idea and it's just kind of hard to put into a chat? So, what is it that you're wanting to look more into? I mean, I don't understand, right? For me, I'm like, I'm gonna put plants in the ground, yay! And I get really excited about it, and I start putting it together. And I believe you've been on your property probably quite a bit longer than I have. And so, how much more can you learn before you start digging into it and experiencing it? You're just researching, right? Like you're not um, going further if you don't start somewhere. I wish it would tell me if you're right. So it's not about necessarily taking more action as making some goal guidelines for yourself. Like, do you want to have accomplishments in your landscaping, in your gardening, in your yard area, and on your property? And putting out, okay, yes, I do, then, you know, you can't do the whole property at once. That would be so expensive in and of itself. With you being up in Massachusetts, you definitely want to keep your taller plants to the north side, right? And then, so like some things that perhaps you would want to know before you move forward. Have you paid much attention to the sun and shade pattern, like we were talking about in a couple of those articles, I think? A lot of sun in the backyard. And is that in the summer, kind of year round? I think year round. Okay. So definitely, really, all of us start noticing that, right? And this is one of the things that I have the biggest worry in my head about going out on these garden consulting endeavors because the sun trajectory is so specific to each location. Now, I mean, I know the locale well enough to be able to place the sun up to a point, and yet each property it's going to have its own uniquenesses when you come to the sun and the shade. And I'm just, whew, that's probably my biggest nerve point. My nervousness area is worrying about the sun shade for helping people plan out these gardens. And so it's something that we want to pay attention to, right? And so if you're thinking year round, do you want it to be a fruit and vegetable producing garden? Do you want it to be something pretty to look at? Do you want to worry about native and pollinator friendly? I will want to have a lot of plants to grow for using for pollination. Okay, so maybe some of like the wildflowers we've been talking about. I actually have a book that I got a couple of them that are about bee friendly endeavors. And this one is just straight called The Bee Friendly Garden. So we can definitely read a little of that next week. And this is the beekeeping handbook on honey, hives, and helping the bees. And I love it, but it's written by someone in, I can't remember what part of Europe. And one of the things that I love the best about this book is that it had this nice graphic of plants that were really important throughout the year. Oh, okay, I've got it marked. That's how much I love it. So it's plant a buffet for bees, right? So what we have here are annuals, cosmos, forage, sunflowers, and snapdragons. Those are all great for bees. For perennials, you have echinacea, clover, bluebell, crocus, and crocus is going to be an early supply of pollen or nectar for a bee colony. Okay, they come up, they're one of the first flowers in spring in cold areas. And then poppies, hellebore, funny that we talked about that. That was in the poison garden, remember? Rosemary and lavender, which were in the garnish, the cocktail garden. So really easy. The snapdragons were in the cottage garden, and echinacea was in one of the gardens. I can't remember which one, right? So a lot of really pretty flowers and some good variety. And if you have those throughout the year, it really helps the bees. And there were some other suggestions as well, but I'm not sure if it was this book or another book. From sallow to heather, it says. Here are some other plants that are good for bees. I thought it had some additional ones. Okay, how much time do we have left? Oh, we probably ought to call it. So I'm just going to read the flowers for the moment. You have dandelion, though that looks nothing like dandelion to me, but we're going to accept that, right? That looks more like catkins on a tree, but dandelion, sallowwood anemone. They have dandelion in here twice, and that's actually a dandelion. So this is meant to be something else. Let's see if I can find it quickly. I don't know, it's saying sallows for yellow catkins, and that sure looks like it. The plants that provide the first pollen of the year are often alder or hazel. So perhaps that's alder or hazel. I'm not that familiar with those two trees. And then you have the sallowwood, definitely an actual dandelion, the cornflower or bachelor's buttons that we were just talking about, and apple blossoms. Those are also really important plants, and I'm sure there are more in here. And we will check this out next week, Benny. We will check out some of the beekeeping and the bee-friendly garden if you will try to help me remember, right? There's always so much to read. I feel like this class could happen every day for 2 hours and we just still get nowhere with the amount of wonderful literature that's out there around all of these different topics, right? So let's jump into our calendar really quickly. And this button will work here. And what do you guys think of the new typography, the style of print? Did you notice that had changed? I don't know how much you all pay attention to fonts. I love fonts because I love writing and typing and reading and all of that. But these are different typeface than what we've had previously. It's all a little bit different. So I've been playing with that. I put up
I
a new
like it.
banner. Do you,
I like
Jenny?
it. I love it. Like I noticed, I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." I like how she did it. Yeah, I thought it
Yeah,
was
it's
like
fun, huh?
an update or some shit.
It
I didn't know
is
you.
in that you get to choose between 5 different fonts that you can have
What?
in your community. And so
Oh,
I
really
tried
cool.
them
Do they
all
have like
out.
do they have like signature, not signature, but what do you call it? Calligraphy, where like kind of like signature writing, where
No,
like
because they want to make it very clear to
invisible.
anyone
Gotcha.
looking at it, right? So
Yeah.
no, that would definitely match,
Something
but
like that. Yeah, something like how you have on your title of your platform, like Collectively
and
Rewilding. I like
and
how
more, unfortunately, people are unable to read cursive. So
uh yeah,
yeah.
that's true.
Mhm. All right. So jumping into our calendar. Oh, you know what? Let's paste that other link that we had there. This should be the most recent link, and that is the Accountant aconitum. I can say the other word that they used much more readily than that word. That one's a hard one. But now, jumping back into our calendar, we have Plan Your Wild workshop tomorrow, and that is going to be at 4 o'clock p.m. Pacific, 5 o'clock p.m. Mountain, 6 o'clock p.m. Central, and 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Hope to see you guys there, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Please feel free to unmute and say good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Ethel. Good night, Vanessa. Good night, Benny, and good night, Sabrina. I will see you all tomorrow.
Have a fabulous week, everyone.
Good night.
Have a lovely night, you guys.
Good night.
Bye, guys.